Peace. Islam. Sheekamauga Alamassee-El. Coming at y'all live. Deep down. Alamassee Arabian country. Coming at y'all live from the Arabia district. Right on the Oconee River. In the historic town of so-called Milledgeville, so-called Georgia. And of course, we know this is an old Moorish town, of course. But very interesting history of this particular town. And if you do the research and you know how to read between the lines, it'll pretty much back up all the real research the real Muslims been out here doing. Kind of correct the fake history and fake narrative that we've been taught in these Marxist curriculums and these sorry, colonist type of schools and institutions and Hollywood fake propaganda narratives. Just clearing up the confusion, how the real modes do. So I'm standing in front of the, now this is a kind of a reproduction, but this is the original, this is the location of the original so-called state of Georgia, the old Republic of Georgia Capitol building. And this is not the original building. This is kind of a recreated version, but it looks pretty much exactly the same. If you kind of get up close on it, you're going to see this, it's kind of been renovated and redone. But as you can see, the architecture, interestingly enough, if you do the research on this old building, now it's the Georgia Military College, of course, but if you do the research on this old Georgia Capitol building, they're going to tell you that it was built around 1807 in the Gothic revival style. Now that's just real laughable. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is a Gothic revival style? That's just anytime you see anything, anytime you do the research on a particular building, this kind of old world of Moorish, with that old Moorish type of architecture, and they say anything revival, like Moorish revival or something like that, that's kind of an insult to real American, to people who understand real American civilization, because that's kind of an attempt to direct our culture back to overseas across the pond, to so-called Europe or Africa or somewhere, talking about some revival style. No, all those styles, all those old Gothic, so-called Romanesque, Moorish style architecture, all that's indigenous to this land right here. We were building those buildings first. We took it over to where y'all was at. For all you clowns sitting up here coming up with this fake history, talking about some revival, no. Y'all have the revival over, y'all got the revival buildings over there in Europe, over there in Africa and all them other places. The originals is all up in here. You know what I'm saying? The Moroccan Empire, Moroccan Empire, North America, North, Central and South America. We got the originals. Don't get it messed up. But they will say that the old Georgia Capitol building was built in the Gothic revival style. But we're gonna do some real quick history on the so-called town of Milledgeville and how it was developed, how it came into being, and how it became the so-called Georgia, the capital of the state of Georgia, or the colony of the Republic of Georgia. So, in this particular piece of land was actually seeded by the Creek, the Miccosukee, and these are again the so-called Creek Nation is all they want to tell you when they talking about the Creeks or the Creek Nation means it was a Moorish Barbary government that was controlling the land, that was controlling this land at that time. Again, in the American Revolutionary War, when the United States prevailed, they became, now when they, and another thing, if you do history, they're going to talk about the British government, the Spanish government, the French, the British, and the Spanish. That's just, they never want to give the real Americans credit for having an old government here and having an old military, an old army. They want to act like the United States was like, the so-called United States invented, that type of government, the military, the three branches of government and all that. Man, that's always been in existence here. You know what I'm saying? We've always had that going on. So the way any pre-United States government, because the only thing about the so-called United States, again, it was created with an agreement between the indigenous peoples and our cousins, our European cousins. You know what I mean? And essentially, if you really want to just keep it all the way funky about the United States being formed was really a certain class of peasant working class people getting their freedom, and the Barbary nations who controlled the majority of the interior of so-called North America, the Moroccan Empire, agreeing not to mass arrest, mass imprison, mass enslave these people from moving around anymore. We were basically allowing them freedom of movement, a certain type of people, settler class, freedom of movement. That's all. That's essentially, if you really want to break it down, that's what the United States is talking about. That's why they always talking about freedom 1776 and all that. And that's real. I mean, I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but the Barbary demonstrations, the so-called, they call them the Indians, the savages, that was the Barbary Moors. You know what I'm saying? All of those situations, all of those so-called tribal governments and all that was the Barbary Moors, the Barbary states of America, who controlled the interior of North America all the way to the West Coast. And we didn't play around. You know, we didn't let certain people move around like they wanted to. You know what I'm saying? A lot of this turf, again, was considered holy. We had a lot of mysteries, a lot of technology, a lot of, you know, hidden gems and gold and everything here that we wasn't just letting everybody move around and be able to see. We kept, unlike a lot of you clowns today who like to get around and talk about everything and tell everything about yourself. Our ancestors wasn't like that, man. We knew how to keep everything within ourselves to maintain power. We didn't talk. You know what I'm saying? That's why they had to come up with all of these, what they call it, the inquisitions and all of these things to make us talk, because we didn't talk. They had to torture you to make you talk back then. Nowadays, you just get on and run your mouth and tell everybody everything about yourself. And then you wonder why you always able to be so easily conquered in everything you do. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, so we'll get back to how, you know, the city of so-called town of Milledgeville came into being. So they had something called the Treaty of Fort Wilkinson in 1802 that the so-called Creek Nation, as a Barbary nation, they agreed to cede a certain amount of land to the United States. And all that means is we're not going to go, if your settler class wants to move outside of the proclamation line of 1763, or the old boundary of the United States, agreed upon boundary of the United States, we're not going to lock them up and arrest them, put them in bondage. We're not gonna snatch them up. That's all it means. When they say the so-called Indian ceded land, that means these people were able to move in this certain amount of a certain zone without us snatching them up. That's, if you really want to keep it funky, that's all it meant. Because we've always been the police. The Moors have always been the American police. You know what I'm saying? Don't let these people fool you. So they ceded the Treaty of Fort Wilkinson. It ceded a certain amount of land to the west of the Oconee River, and the Oconee River runs right through Milledgeville. You know what I'm saying? This is an old river highway, an old part of the river highway system. You can get all the way straight to Savannah on the Oconee River. You know what I'm saying? But it allowed the settlers, it allowed them freedom of movement through a certain zone. So now this is the story they're going to give you. Okay, that treaty was signed in 1802. Now they're going to tell you that then they designated the so-called town of Milledgeville to be the Georgia capital in 1804. It was either 1803 or 1804, something like that. Now you tell me, how in the holy hell did they just were able to get access to a piece of land, but they already created they already have built the town in 2 years, and it's capital of the so-called state of Republic of Georgia. Come on, man. You know what I'm saying? This was a Moorish town, and again, when you ceded this, when we ceded land, or we gave up the land and allowed them freedom of movement, that we lost kind of the governorship of certain towns, and we agreed to kind of integrate it in with the so-called United States and the settler class and their peasant class, their worker class. So that means you kind of lost trusteeship over a lot of these buildings, a lot of these towns, and you let them incorporate it and integrate it into their demonstration. That's all it was. You just lost jurisdiction. The town was already there. Everything was already there. It was already in existence. You just lost your jurisdiction over these places. That's all it meant. So, and then they say that this building, the Georgia Capitol building, was built in 1807. So y'all just got this land through treaty in 1802. Y'all just chartered this town in 1804. Okay, y'all magically built the town in 2 years, and then you built this building in 1807 around that time. Come on, man. In the Gothic revival style. Come on, man. This is an old Moorish building. It was here in the Creek Nation, in the so-called Creek Nation, in the Barbary, the Miccosukee nation that we had going on down here. It was already here. It's our old building. You know what I'm saying? I mean, let's just keep it 100, man. So just doing the knowledge on that, man. You always have to read between the lines and do the research, and you're kind of gonna be able to uncover what your civilization really is. That's why a lot of times you're out here looking lost, and people, people don't know. You don't know what to do with yourself. People don't know what to do with you. They just calling you whatever, a slave or whatever. But man, this is your lost culture right here. You know what I mean? This is just your lost culture. You just agreed to give up jurisdiction and allow trusteeship from a different entity over your stuff. That's it. It's really not that. It's really not as deep as they want it to be. So just doing the knowledge on that. As far as how this building. Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about if you do the research on Milledgeville, and they have a lot of articles, Wikipedia articles. Another thing that a gem they dropped is they said, of course they're going to give you the slave narrative or whatever. But one gem they did drop that I did see was they said that in the so-called town of Milledgeville, the so-called black carpenters, they were forced to build all of the antebellum structures in Milledgeville. Now, again, in the reconstructed Marxist type of history, they don't acknowledge Moors. They don't acknowledge us having a civilization or having our own thing, or us being able to construct any type of republic or nation or anything throughout history. We just supposed to be somebody's slave. You know what I'm saying? But they pretty much letting you know and giving you credit. They say the so-called black carpenters were forced to build all of the antebellum structures here. So who built this stuff? They straight told you. They straight told you. This is the Moors built all that, man. Anytime you see all of these old structures, this is Moorish stuff, man. They told you. They gonna give you that fake slave narrative. You know what I'm saying? About you were forced to do something. You weren't forced to do anything. These are your buildings that you occupied in your free republic. You know what I'm saying? You just agreed to integrate. You through a lot of just watering down and people running down and marrying into your families, and you becoming more and more friendly to these people, and in a faction of traditionalists, and whenever you read an article and they talk about a so-called Native American or Indian, because Indian to them, the term Indian, of course it means more, but it really just means, like, when you think of an old when you think of like say if you I don't know if any of you guys used to watch that cartoon Speed Racer, I think, and they had the Indian character in a turban, and he would say Sin Salabin, but he was, they call him he was an Indian. That's what they called us, because that's how we used to dress. We wore the turbans, we wore the Sufi clothes, we were like the magical Moors. So, they just, that's the same people they saw in Hindustan, the same type of people with the same, with the same style of dress, everything over there in Hindustan, Afghanistan, the same culture exists. So they just, that's really where that term Indian comes from. You know what I'm saying? Keep it 100. But, they always, it's interesting that they would admit who built all this stuff. The so-called black carpenters. Man, come on, man. So, man, just doing the knowledge, man. This was the old Georgia State Capitol building. And just wanted to break down on the town of Milledgeville and how the short amount of time they say that this became the Georgia State Capitol, and they were only ceded the land in 1802, but in 1804 it's automatic. In 2 years there's a town here to be the Georgia capital. Man, come on, man. Old Moorish town, partner. Old Moorish town. And then another interesting tidbit I found through research was, they when they were able to get this land, they kind of admit that they started the so-called land lotteries. So this is how a lot of these clowns, you got a lot the continued narrative over the last, say, 150 years, that a lot of foreigners want to come here, or so-called immigrants or whatever. They like to come here and say, y'all don't work that hard, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You know what I'm saying? Man, listen. When we agreed to stop arresting all y'all running around in Barbary territory, and we gave y'all some land to move around on, and we dissolved our stuff and moved it back further and further. They had land lotteries and just gave y'all free land. That's how y'all got everything. The Homestead Act, all that stuff, man. Y'all ain't worked for nothing, collectively. So get out of here with that, man. You know what I'm saying? Y'all were given it. It was given to you. You ain't worked for shit. Excuse my French. You ain't worked for nothing. So let's get that up out the paint, man. This is the land of Barbary, partner. The North America, the Almoravian Empire, is the land of Barbary. Anything old school is Barbary. You know what I mean? So just getting that up out the paint, man. Checking in live from Milledgeville, man. We're gonna do a couple of drops while we're here, just doing the knowledge, and I'll tap back in with y'all. Peace.